It's June 29th, 2020. This is Roqe. This is an information age that's fueled by outrage and a deepening despair around who and what to believe. Competing media, clickbait, technology trolls, social media spirals all make it difficult to weed through to the truth. But this is even more animated when it comes to Iran. How are we supposed to know exactly what's happening with our friends and family on the ground? No one narrative can be believed, but a German journalist who's been on the front lines in Tehran for the last 15 years, maybe she can shed some insight. Award-winning German-Iranian reporter Natalie Amiri joins me today, as well as a feature interview with Ahmad Kiarostami. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. This is Roqe. Welcome to episode number 22 of Roqe. Hope you're doing well out there. خوشحالیم که با ما هستین. Hi, Shaijun.
Hello, hi.
Listen, you know, if you're of Iranian descent or have any interest at all in Persian culture, you will have heard the name Kiarostami. Abbas Kiarostami was, of course, one of the greatest filmmakers of any country or culture ever, and an undeniable cultural icon of 20th and 21st century Iran. Last week would have been his 80th birthday. Later this week will be the 4th anniversary of his sad passing in 2016. In about 45 minutes from now, I expect to be joined by Ahmad Kiarostami, his son, the filmmaker, the entrepreneur, and now the founder of the Kiarostami Foundation, which, amongst other things, on the occasion of his 80th birthday last week, donated all of his awards to the Museum of Cinema, I believe, in Iran.
Yes, Musée Cinema.
Musée Cinema. So we will get to Ahmad Kiarostami, but first, amidst her love for her homeland and a prolific record of exhibiting courage as a journalist in Iran, my first guest today has been one of the few international reporters who, in the past 15 years, has observed one storm after another in Iran on the ground there and told the story of a nation and a country to millions of viewers around the world. She is an esteemed journalist in news broadcasting with a remarkable career who has covered political uprisings, economic crises, nuclear deals, and who believes an isolated society like Iran must have a thriving press. Natalie Amiri is an award-winning German-Iranian journalist. Born in Munich to a German mother and an Iranian father, Natalie grew up going to Catholic church and eating ghormeh sabzi. Natalie took a job at the German embassy in Tehran for a time and has worked for numerous news programs and magazines and television radio stations, including ARD broadcasters and Deutschland Radio. She has reported from war zones and the sites of natural disasters around the world, including Europe, Iran, Syria, Libya, Egypt, and Afghanistan, and has interviewed powerful Iranian politicians such as Rafsanjani, Mousavi, Khatami, Ahmadinejad, and Larijani, as well as important figures like Nasrin Sotoudeh, among others. In addition to being fluent in German and English, Natalie also speaks Farsi, Arabic, Dari, and French. And right now, Natalie Amiri, ARD's chief correspondent of Tehran's bureau for the past 5 years, joins me from Munich, Germany. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to have you on this program. Thank you for doing this. You know, I knew you were a German journalist. I knew you had some Iranian background. I knew you had done some work in Iran. I did not know that you've been reporting from Iran until just last month. So let me start with this. How would you characterize life in Iran right now amidst sanctions, saber rattling with the United States, and trying to emerge from a pandemic?
It's like you said, I'm in Iran and I was working in Iran since 2005. So I saw Ahmadinejad, I saw the uprising 2009, which were called Hashtag the Green Movement. I saw when the people had to struggle against the economic crisis. I saw so many things, but now they reached a disaster because they are facing the US sanctions, which are really hitting the country. They are facing Corona. They're facing mistrust against the regime because they saw what happened in the past month. And they're just, it's like a whole depression over the country. So I'm listening to so many stories, and I heard of so many people who committed suicide in the last months because they're so depressed and frustrated, and they have no hope anymore. So there were always a glimpse of hope during the time when I was there, but now it's like a death end. They don't know how it's going on, and they say it cannot go on with the small demonstration on the streets. It's like it has to explode. Something has to happen because they're so fed up with everything.
It's even difficult to hear that response, and I want to untangle it or get into some of what you've said there. But let me just start with the pandemic and what's been happening with COVID. Iran was one of the early epicenters, of course, of COVID-19. You know, Natalie, on the outside, we've heard these wildly varying reports about the impact of COVID in Iran, from the idea that Iran has somehow managed it, which would be the official line from the government, and it's kind of over with now, or managed, to a notion that there have been millions infected and the information has been suppressed. Especially as we see the cases soaring in the United States again now. What is your sense of the truth about this pandemic on the ground in Iran?
Look, they were faking the numbers from the beginning. And they knew, and I was talking to a lot of doctors in Tehran and in Qom, they knew that the virus was already in Iran at the beginning of the year. So in January, they had already patients with this virus. But nobody were telling the people in Iran that, look, take care on the streets, wear a mask, whatever. They were not talking about the virus because they wanted that the people come to the election on February. And the government knew that the people will not come this time because the people said, look, we got your game. This game between reformists and hardliners, we are not playing your game anymore. So we will not come and give our votes. But after these elections, the COVID-19 patients grow exponentially. The government announced for the first time, yes, we have 2 COVID-19 patients, and some hours after this, they announced their death. And from this moment on, they announced everyday numbers, but the numbers were too low. And even some parliament members said, no, that's not the correct number. But whoever were talking about a fraud and fake numbers and too low numbers got arrested. So even the deputy minister of health said while he was sweating in a press conference that they have everything under control. One day after, he now announced on Twitter, من یک کرانی شدم, it means I got corona.
Yeah.
And from this moment on, a lot of government people, a lot of people from the system, even a very close advisor to Ayatollah Khamenei, got this disease and died. There's a lot to talk about it, so I can talk more.
Of course, yeah.
About
If we know that the numbers are fake, or assume that they're coming from the government, do we have a sense of what the actual numbers are? I mean, is it 5 times what they're saying? Is it you look at that map, the Johns Hopkins University map of where all the cases are and the deaths in the world. Is it 10 times that? Is it? I mean, what are we supposed to believe?
Look, at the beginning of March, there were a UN delegation of WHO in Iran, and they said after they returned that the numbers are 5 times higher. So we still have no reliable numbers on Iran, but the guess of them are it's 5 times higher.
It must be I'm sure it's jarring on all kinds of levels for you to return to Munich after being in Tehran for the last few years. But just on this particular point of COVID-19 and how well, seemingly from the outside, Germany has managed this, it must be very interesting for you going from Iran to Germany with respect to the pandemic.
It's always interesting to go from Iran to Germany. I'm always appreciating the freedom and the way how our government in Germany is handling everything. Because if you compare these two governments, it's like completely the opposite, and that's why I'm always telling the people in Germany, look, maybe it's not perfect, 100% perfect, everything in Germany, but please try starting to understand that we are here in a luxury situation and that we have to appreciate what our government is doing. If you compare it to a country like Iran, where you cannot trust at all, the people are not trusting the government, and the government are not trusting the people. So the whole country is a lie.
And yet, you stayed there for the last few years. You've returned there a number of times, and I want to get into that and your story, because you're clearly seduced or captivated or interested or in love with or appreciative of the country that is half of your background as well. So, but before we get into your story, there's no end of questions I want to ask you about the many years you spent reporting from Iran and living there in a few stints over the last couple of decades. Let me start with this. How does Iran see you as a journalist and I guess a dual citizen? Are you considered an Iranian reporter subject to Iranian laws, or a foreign journalist who can be expelled? What do they make of you?
Look, because the ARD channel, it's the biggest TV channel in Germany, and quite powerful, and you can compare it to BBC. It's even bigger in Europe. I thought that I'm always in a safe position, even though that I am a dual citizen and I have two passports. But at the end, Iran considers me as an Iranian. So maybe other journalists, and I saw a lot of them, international journalists, were kicked out of the country if they're, not reporting in the way that Iran wants. But in my case, they can threaten me, they can put me into prison, and Germany would not have the right to fight for me, because they consider me as an Iranian. And that was the risk, and that was the danger that I had all the time, while I was working. And at the end, it was just too risky, and the Foreign Office said, it's a too big danger, and they are thinking that they take me as a political hostage. And they told me not to go to Iran anymore, which I really suffer under this condition, because I felt like I'm always the voice, of the civil society, and I can, even though I cannot say everything because they would kick me out or bring me into prison, but I can say 80%, and that's more than a journalist can say who is not aware of the situation and not in the country. So,
but Natalie, you have been arrested, right? You've been arrested and interrogated several times over the years in Iran. What were you arrested for?
Passport and forbid me to exit the country for a while. Yes, it was. But it's somehow when you growing up in a free country, and then you're telling the stories, when I'm telling it to my colleagues or to my friends, they're so, oh my God, and what happened to you? But it's like a daily thing if you're working as a journalist in Iran.
So, meaning that, what do you mean? That you're not scared of being arrested? Don't people end up, in some cases, in Evin, and some people end up disappearing and dying? It's. I would think it's even more terrifying. No.
Yeah, but I had two feelings. Yes, I'm not a stupid person, so I know I'm aware of the danger. But at the other side, I'm a fighter, and it was always more important for me to be a voice of the oppressed people than to think about my freedom. Then I could choose to work in another country, but it was my choice to work there and to risk this. Yeah. I'm really happy when the people are sending me emails and said, look, we were seeing Iran as a very dark country with, very extremist people. And thanks God that you showed us another picture of the Iranians, and that you showed us a modern society with powerful women. And that was my energy push for going on with my work.
This is a perfect segue because I want to get to what you've just talked about, but you talk about being a voice that wanted to be there. Let's talk about how you got there, because the fact that you're so Iranian in identity and work experience is actually fascinating, because you could have chosen to just be another German kid who happens to have a parent from elsewhere, one parent. Take me back to when you were a little girl, first of all, growing up in Munich. What was your experience like growing up with a German mom and an Iranian father in Germany?
If I would describe me, my brain is German and my heart is Iranian. And I always wanted to be more Iranian than German. And I'm quite blonde for Iranians, so I always wanted to look Iranian. And I colored my hair when I was a teenager black, but it didn't fit me. So I always loved Iran, and I wanted always to be part of Iran. And when I was 3, there were in the main news in Germany pictures from the Iran-Iraq war, from the revolution. And I was 3, and I was watching it with my parents, and that are not pictures that children like. And I just said, okay, I have to pack my stuff. I have to go to Iran.
Yeah, the image of you dyeing your hair to try and look more Iranian is gonna be quite a laugh for a lot of Iranians, as you know, who would give anything to have blonde hair, and in fact do give anything to have blonde hair and dye their hair. So it's an amazing story. Did you learn Farsi as a child? Did your dad speak Farsi with you in the house?
No. He never spoke with us Farsi, and compared to the Turkish people in Germany, which are all able to speak Turkish, the half Iranians in Germany are really few who are able to speak Farsi. And my father too, he didn't speak with me Farsi. It was something, I don't know, it was something like integration thing, even though he was a carpet seller and there were a lot of Iranians all the time in his shop. So I was growing up with the sound of Farsi, but I never were able to speak. Actually, I just knew some songs like Tuppe Sefidam and these things from my mother, from my German mother, because she was really in love with Iran and we had a lot of family at our house.
Wait a minute. Your mom was teaching you the Farsi songs? Your German mom. That's so what and where did she learn them? I mean, what was your dad doing when she was teaching you Farsi songs?
Look, she was growing up in a very, very small family. So there were just 3. And suddenly he married my father, and there were this big, big Iranian, huge family. And she fell in love with the whole family, and the whole family fell in love with my mother. So I grew up with no German food at all. I was growing up with korma sabzi. Really, I'm not able to cook a German food. I'm really just able to cook korma sabzi, khorj karaf, all these things. But yeah, because my mother felt also in love with Iran. I think the love to this country and to the culture was more transported by my mother to me than through my father.
And there's this story, you tell me if this is true, but that you're this little blonde girl growing up in Germany, and there's a trip you end up taking, not with your dad, but with your mom and sister to Iran, and that trip has a big impact on you. Tell me about that trip.
Yeah, I was 3 and my sister was 1 year old, and my mother said the husband of my cousin died in the war. And my mother had the feeling to be there, to support her, to be on her side. And she said, okay, we are going to Iran. And it was in the middle of the war and the revolution. And I can remember as a child that there were all these Gasht Ershad and these women with chador, and they were yelling at my mother. But she ignored them. She just were in love with the family, and she thought she had to support my cousin. So she wanted to be there, and she was going with her two German, very small children to Iran to stay on the side of my family.
And what impact did that have on you? Do you remember?
The bigger impact that I had on when I was growing up and I was a teenager and I got my A level, I was there when I was 17.
Yes.
And it was quite a while that we didn't go to Iran. So I was like after 4 or 5 years the first time in Iran. I got my A level and I had a group with me, like my history teacher and a lot of friends, and we were 10. So we were traveling around Tehran and Iran, and it was really like positive energy in the country because Khatami was in power, and there were a glimpse of hope in the country, and you felt the growing press freedom. You had a lot of newspapers, and there were opposition who I would call opposition, not something like now. So I went to Iran, and after 2 weeks when we came back to Munich, I said to my father, look, I had the plan to study business. I never started it because I have to go back to Iran. Because I'm getting depressed here. I have to go back to Iran. Otherwise, I don't know, I commit suicide in Munich and I don't want to stay here. So my father just said, oh my God, she's a little bit crazy, but for God's sake, go. And we bought a ticket and I went back to Iran and I stayed there for 6 months. And then I got more addicted. I think at this time I was so in love with this country that every guy who was just playing one Gugush song for me, I would say yes to him. I was really in love with everything. So
your father must have got such a kick out of this, or found this so interesting that he obviously left Iran for a life in Germany, and here's his daughter
55 years ago.
Yes. So what would he say to you when you would, other than joking around about your divane or whatever, what are you going, going back there? But what would he really think of this, his daughter being so enamored of Iran?
I don't know. He was not really taking it serious at the beginning. And maybe he had the wish that it's going more normal on in my life. And maybe he had the wish that I'm, studying business or medicine, and then will get a very good chastegard, and then, we have a perfect wedding and so on, and we have a normal, safe life in Germany. The thing is, what my father is, right now, he is proud of me, but he's still all the time scared, and he has a lot of stress always when I went to Iran, and the whole Iran thing is stressing him because he hates religion, he hates this kind of regime, and he hates when people are oppressing human rights, and he cannot understand it, and he cannot even see it what's happening in Iran. Mm-hmm. And so in all this situation, in the middle of this, he has to see his daughter. So it's quite hard for him, but at the other side, he is also sometimes proud. Sometimes, because he is a Yazdi, and he says, when I'm telling too much that you're good, then you become Ashod Razi, and you don't have to be.
Right. As my dear old late father would say, that is great. Yeah. That is great, but please work harder. So, well, you can understand your dad's concern, but it leads me to a question that, and if you don't mind, as a sidebar from just telling the story of what you see on the front lines, I'm always so interested in how someone like you look. I've worked in media and journalism for 20 years, and I have the utmost respect for people who are foreign correspondents or foreign journalists who go out into the field like the way you have, because you're making a choice to do that. And as a young German girl in your native land, you could have chosen a safer route. You could have probably, you've got the chops. You're very good at what you do. You could have a successful career on television just sitting in Munich for the last 20 years. I'm curious about where the urge comes from to become someone who wants to bear witness to the current events in Iran, in Syria, in Africa. What attracts you to being on the front lines?
Because in these countries, I'm not one of a million. There are not so many people who choose this way, and I can be there an important voice. I can do something very useful, and I wanted to do something useful. I wanted to do something with an impact, and that's the thing that it's kicking me all the time. It's pushing me. It's like in my blood. I have to go out, and maybe a thing that I can talk about with a therapist, but it's like I am.
It's hard to establish a routine, a sort of quote unquote normal life this way, though. And that affects everything, right? It affects who your partner is going to be. It affects how you're going to live your years, all of that. I mean, there are trade-offs, I'm sure.
Yes, I choose the work part. It's hard to establish a family. It's hard to find a partner who is accepting all this. You're never at one point, you're never in one city. You're all the time traveling, and you get a call and you have to be all the time aware of the next crisis. And, my mobile and me, we're like connected 24 hours and I'm following the news. It's somehow crazy. It's not normal life. And a lot of people would hate this. And yes, to be honest, I had the feeling that I'm close to a burnout because, when you're all the time connected with bad things and with disasters and with chaos and with crime and with people who are so in an unbelievable bad condition. So that has an impact on you and it's affecting you. And right now, since I had to leave Iran 1st of May, and I'm coming a little bit more down, and I'm relaxing. So I'm starting right now to dream about all the things that I experienced and that I saw, all the pictures, because I was like functioning all the time for the last 13 years. And now I'm handling right now all the things what I saw.
Sounds like you're in the process of decompressing and processing at the same time, and it's understandable, and it sounds like it's a good time for you to take that respite, that break, if you can. I have to ask you about these stints to Iran. First of all, you just talked about being there as a 17-year-old and then wanting to go back there and stay there for a few months. How do you actually become a journalist working there? How did you decide to first work and live in Iran? How did that happen?
So, like I told you, I was not able to speak Farsi. And when I was in Iran, I just heard that you can study Oriental Studies, focus on Iranian studies in Germany, in Bamberg. So I decided when I was in Iran for the 6 months after my A-level to go back to Germany to study Iranian science and Islamic science. And then we were really like 5 people at university at these courses because, nobody was interested to study this. Then 9/11 happened, and actually it was like booming, every course was full of people because somehow it got more, in the focus of interest. And I finished my studies, and I did my master's in Iranian studies and Islamic science. And then in between, I was 6 months in Iran at Danishgah Tehran, and I was 6 months in Damascus studying Arabic at the university there. So 2005, I finished my studies at the university, and I said, okay, what shall I do now? There is no job offers in the newspapers for Iran. I just have to go. And then I packed my stuff, and 4 weeks after I got my degree, I arrived in Tehran, and I got an job in at the German embassy in the political and press section, and I was working there for 2 years. And then the correspondent from ARD saw me, and we had a lot of common, issues because we were helping them to open a studio there. And he asked me, "Do you want to be our producer?" And actually, when I was like 10 or 11 or 12, my main goal was to become a foreign correspondent, especially a war correspondent.
Wow.
So I always wanted to be this. And, Christiane Amanpour was, always in front of my eyes, and I wanted to be like her. So yes, I switched to ARD, and then 2009 happened, the Green Movement, the Green Revolution with Mousavi and Karoubi and Rahnavard and all of them. And I became a journalist.
It's quite an incredible story that you almost happen into this, but that it was your dream. You get your dream job by a strange obstacle course of events rather than a linear path through journalism.
It was not a master plan.
Right. But so you're there for the Green Movement and that disputed election of 2009. You end up leaving after that. Tell me why you were leaving and set the scene, if you can, from your perspective at that time when Ahmadinejad comes into office for a second time. Tell us what you saw during the Green Movement and why you end up leaving.
Look, when the elections were happening in 2009, we were so exhausted at the election day that we just wanted to go to bed and sleep for weeks because it was such a great atmosphere, the whole election period. We were every day out, we were shooting the people, they were happy, they were, I remember there were this people chain from Tajish, the whole Balias, like 17 kilometers, full of young people celebrating that there will be a change and there will be reforms, and they were celebrating Mousavi and Rahnavard, his wife, and it was such an euphoric situation and atmosphere in Iran. So we were all the time working, and at the end, the election day happened, and everybody said, yes, we won, and Mousavi will win, and we just wanted to fall into our beds and sleep. And then we got a call from the office of Mousavi, and they were calling every journalist who were in the city, and there were a lot of journalists, BBC, CNN, NBC, everybody was there because they got invited because of the election, to cover the election. Nobody knew what will happen. And then they said, come to our office, there is happening a fraud, something is going on, they will fake the election results, and we have to tell you the truth. So we all gathered there, and there were like, I don't know, 200 journalists. Next to me, who were standing, Christiane Amanpour. So, and we were just packed. We couldn't breathe anymore because it was so full of journalists. And Mousavi come and telling us, there is happening a fraud. They faked the election. Please be aware. From tomorrow on, we will have something going on, but we will not accept the results. Right. And from this day on, it was like a movie. It was like a thriller. And my chief said to me, look, I'm now working for 30 years as a correspondent. I was working in Israel, I was working in Turkey, I was working everywhere. But this thing, what you will experience now, is a historical event. And it was historical. There were people coming out, and we were every day out covering the news. And I just saw these amazing women. They were just covered by green scarves, and they were just protesting, and they were coming to the streets and say, give us our vote back. And they were so brave and so strong. And I saw the Basij militias, and they were coming with tear gas, and they were coming with knives, and they were coming with all these weapons. And still the people went to the streets and were fighting for their votes. And it took like weeks, and there were like hundreds of thousands of people But at the end, to make it short, they failed. They failed to get their vote back. Ahmadinejad was the second, was again the president of the country, and Khamenei said, from now on, everybody who is on the street will get killed. He didn't say it like this, but he meant it, and everybody knew it. So, so from 2010 on, there were a whole depression over the country. The whole opposition left the country or were imprisoned. And after a while, I couldn't stand it anymore because there was so much hope, and the people were so sure about to win. And then everybody was leaving. I had no person anymore for an interview. Nobody was able to talk to me because either they were in prison or they left the country, or the government, the regime, forbid them to talk. So it was just not possible to work as a journalist anymore. And I was there for 6 years. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm leaving the country. That was 2011.
It's heartbreaking, really. You do, however, return to Iran in 2015 when Iran reaches the nuclear proliferation agreement. There's obviously different schools of thoughts on this. And how do you think the nuclear deal would have impacted Iran? Do you think, I mean, it seemed to have been doing its work for the 2 years before it was, or the years before it was scuttled by Trump. Do you think this deal would be capable of improving the human rights situation in Iran, for example, by giving Rouhani leverage? Do you think that that the path had been created there before what we see in the last few years?
I have to commit, yes. Everybody was thinking this, even the population in Iran, even the Iranians were thinking, yes, we give our vote to Rouhani because he promised us to improve our situation, not only the economical situation. They said, he said, I promise you to improve the political freedom, to improve the human rights. I improve the whole situation step by step. And the people believed him. When the JCPOA happened, 2015, I took over the bureau as a chief in Tehran, and there were again this hope in the country, and everybody was really euphoric about the situation, and they said, yes, so many people were coming back from abroad to be part of this new era, to be part of this new beginning in the country. And they really thought that they will be a new start. And a lot of delegations were coming. You know, I was for so many years in Iran, maybe all the years I saw 2 or 3 German delegations. But 2015, there were per week 3 delegations from Germany there who were interested to do business with Iranians, because it was suddenly a free market, a free business market. And it was a good chance for a lot of companies to invest in this country because they knew there is a lot of money and they need a lot of things. There is no big business companies. It was it was a very positive atmosphere. The people were really hopeful that something will happen towards a better future for all of them.
Natalie, I have to ask you, is it true that you were the only foreign journalist stationed in Iran for many of these years? And if that's true, what was it like carrying the torch when so many others are not able to report from the ground there? That would feel like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and a lot of pressure, because if you're the only person in front of Evin prison and you're saying there are prisoners inside, political prisoners, they will catch you and bring you also into prison. So if you're saying in front of the camera, broadcasting it, that there are protesters on the street saying Mark Bar Khamenei and death to the dictator and regime change, yes, it's very really big responsibility.
Well,
I
also
was
because
not
you want to get the
only,
story
yeah.
right? Because you're feeding a narrative that you're creating a pipeline of information for those of us in the West or outside of Iran that it has a lot of weight to it because there isn't 1,000 foreign journalists working in Iran.
Yeah. It is like this. Yeah, I was sometimes I was not all the time the only journalist. I was the only female journalist who was all the time there permanently. So there were coming and going people. But when you're a foreign journalist and you're just getting after months of visa for 2 weeks, you will not say some critical stuff. So you're happy if you see Isfahan and you see Yaz, then you make some good pictures, and then you go to the Grand Bazaar, and then you're leaving the country, and so on. But if you're there when the things are happening, like the protests, which were over the whole country, 2017, 18, I was the only foreign journalist reporting about these protests. But at the same time, it's very hard because it was New Year's Eve, so all the newspapers and so on were working from the 4th or 5th of January, and they stopped the protests, with tear gas and all the things. And then everybody started to write about it abroad. And then I was staying in Tehran saying, sorry, but the protests are over. The people didn't have the chance because Basij and Sepah were again on the streets, and they just crippled them. And then you're also facing attacks from outside because they say, you're just saying what the Islamic Republic wants. And do you understand what I say? It's like, it's over because
can't win.
people didn't win the fight.
Right.
But I just can't report what's the true.
Right.
There is nobody on the streets anymore. Sorry that you're coming back from your holidays over New Year's Eve, but the people were struggling in the days before and fighting on the streets. But it's over now. So it's a very short time that the people in Iran have the chance to go to the streets, because it's a perfectly organized system to repress the people and to stop the protests. They have a perfect system, and they pick everybody after the protest out, and they knew everybody who was there, and then they start with the Secret Service to threat you.
Well, speaking of repressing the protests, tell me about the protests last year, November 2019, after the sudden rise in gas prices, when the internet was shut down. Protesters end up being shot in the streets. I mean, this was terrifying and enraging to see from afar. Was your ability to report from Iran at that time paralyzed or compromised due to problems of access and security? How much information could you get out, and what did you see?
That was a new level of crime of the Iranian regime. They were just shooting into the people. Like they were just killing the people, when we had Neda Agha Sultan 2009, she was a very famous deaf person.
Yes.
But we had hundreds of Neda Agha Sultan 2019 in November. And it's like they crossed a red line. And for every other protest which will happen, they will do the same. So it was a warning. It was a warning for the protesters, and it was at the same time a warning for the regime that the protesters will not be silent anymore and will just shout. They will also take a weapon into their hands, because they started damaging everything, like police stations, banks, and so on. So I think the next protests will be much more bloody and much more brutal that we ever saw before.
I'm glad you just said what you said, because before I ask this question, no one can accuse you, based on the last 45 minutes and based on what you just said, of being pro-regime or going too softly on them. But with that said, do you think Iran is portrayed fairly in international media? I mean, there are some who argue that while things are clearly bad in Iran, that journalists tend to only focus on pinpointing the shortcomings of the government, the regime, the actions of the politicians, and spend less time reporting positive elements or offering solutions or just exploring the culture on the ground. How do you feel about that? Where do you come down on this question?
Look, there is Iran with a civil society, with people who are having feelings, who are extremely polite, which I love, which I really admire for their strength and power and cleverness. And there is an Iran with ayatollahs and with death threats towards Israel, and with an with a nuclear program, and with rockets in Lebanon towards Israel, and with supporting Hezbollah and Shia militias in Iraq and in Syria. There are two sides of this country, and it's very complex, the whole country. Iran is not explained in an easy, you cannot explain Iran in 5 minutes. You have to talk weeks, and in the news, you have sometimes just time for 1:30, so 1 minute and 30 seconds, a news clip. And in these 1 minute and something, you cannot explain Iran. So then you have a president like Ahmadinejad who is saying stupid things, and the news are working like this, that you have to say what he said.
Right.
So half of the story is over, and you didn't explain what does this mean, what is between the lines, what the people are thinking, because your time is over. So it's very hard to give 100% picture of the country, because it's just too complicated. The whole situation, the whole political situation is too complicated. Iran and the regime is not one group. They are right now having a really strong power fight between different groups, and they're eliminating each against each other, and they're fighting against each other. But from outside, you think, okay, there is an Islamic Republic, one regime, and they're a unity. It's not like this. It's much more complicated.
I don't want to question your professionalism, but is it ever hard for you to maintain a sense of objectivity or arm's length because you have an Iranian background? In other words, can Natalie report on the atrocity of the shooting of the Ukrainian flight 752, say, in the same way as you would about a similar incident in Syria, or poverty in Africa, or starvation in Yemen?
That's my aim. That's my profession. I have to be professional. And sometimes when I'm very not neutral and when I'm very objective on issues, Iranians who are living outside, accusing me of being objective, and they're saying, why you are not saying death to the dictator? But I'm a journalist. I have to say what is going on. I don't have to mix it up with my opinion. Yes, when we are now talking, I can tell you my opinion, but not when I'm doing the news. But I can give people in Iran the chance to say something to the world. But it's not my job to take my scarf down, to be a hero for 4 days, and on the 5th day, everybody forgot me, just not the Islamic Republic, and they will not give me a permission to work anymore. So I cannot be an activist in Iran. I have to be a journalist. And that's a thing that some people are mixing up. As a journalist, you have to be objective. What's going on in my heart when I'm talking about this and about the oppression in Iran, about the fight of the women? Yes, my heart is crying all the time, but I have to be professional and I cannot cry in front of the camera.
You're back in Germany now. What do you feel is the most underreported story when it comes to Iran today, or Iranians, including those in the diaspora? Is there something that is there one that got away, or is there a story that you think should be covered?
Look, the civil society is living a life which the Islamic Republic don't want to see broadcasted, but they're having a life like us. So these pictures from parties, from happiness, from friendship, from poker nights, from vodka drinking, all these pictures who are not allowed to shoot and to film. And if you would shoot it and you would film it, you would bring the people into a dangerous situation, because they will get problems. So these other side from Iran, the real side, which I say, I would so much love to show more of this side of the Iranians. And another thing is what I really always wanted to show is the similarity between the two populations and societies between Israel and Iran. If you party with people in Tel Aviv, it's the same kind of party like in Tehran. And if you look into the eyes of the fanatics, even in Rome or in Jerusalem, it's the same stupidity that you say. So I think Israel and Iran could be really close friends. And I'm really sad about this thing what the politicians in both countries are doing. They're abusing the people, because I think the people could be really good friends, because they're really similar in their characters and mentality.
I don't even know if you know this, but the most recent episode of Roqe, we have a woman named Orly Noy was on, who is an Iranian who lives in Israel, and was the first person to translate some of the contemporary works of Iranian literature into Hebrew, like Dijon Napoleon, and she was saying almost the exact same thing in terms of the
Really?
intertwining of the cultures.
I didn't listen to this.
Yes, we'll send you that. Yeah. Listen, I'm very grateful for the time you've given us. I won't keep you forever. I just have a couple more questions. I want to return to this question of how you see your identity now. Earlier, you kind of jokingly said, although I'm sure you've said it before, that your mind is German, your heart is Iranian. How much do you navigate those two worlds? In other words, when you've just spent these few years in Iran and you returned to Munich last month, did it feel like coming home at the end of the day? Can you pick, or do you, as Dr. Merzad Boroujerdi said on this program a couple of months ago, why do we choose to be one-dimensional? We can celebrate the duality in ourselves and belong to more than one culture. How do you feel?
Yeah, actually, I had an interview with also half Iranian journalist, and she said to me, "Yeah, look, I'm never seen myself as a whole, as a complete person. So I'm always half, and I'm never depending to one of these sides. And I see it in another way. I see it more positive. And I have the feeling that I don't have a complex because I'm half. I'm very happy because of this. It's like a present. It's like, I got as a present two cultures. So I have two countries. I have two languages. I have two families. And it's a gift. I like it. I love it. I'm happy that I can cook for my guests Iranian food, and I'm happy that I have an Iranian heart and a German brain, and this kind of combination in myself.
I love what you said. You said it very beautifully. Your English is just fine. It's perfect.
Because I know that you speak Farsi, and I want to switch to Farsi all the time, and that's too much for my brain right now. But okay, I hope that everybody understands.
Well, apparently, you could switch to all kinds of languages that you speak. The impressive dossier that is Natalie Amiri. Listen, one final question: the list of places that you have traveled to, lived in, reported from, is so impressive and so immense, including a lot of conflict zones, as we've discussed: Syria, Libya, Afghanistan. What would you say is something that you've learned about life or the world?
I have to be so grateful to live in a free country every minute. We have all to wear masks now, and we have this shutdown, but the government is not doing it because they want to oppress us. They're just thinking about our health. And I'm just appreciating what we have here. And some people forget what we have to enjoy every day, because to live in a country where you don't have freedom and where you have to fear every day that somebody is knocking on your door, is taking your children away, and you don't know where they bring your children, and maybe they get killed, and you don't have the opportunity to take a lawyer and to fight for them, and you don't have any rights. It's like the hell. And when you experience this for so many years, and you have the chance to go out of this country, you have just to enjoy life every minute and thank God that you're having this luck to be in such a condition.
Natalie Amiri, I really appreciate this today. Truly. Thank you so much for this.
You're very welcome.
Khodafis.
Goodbye. Khodafis.
Natalie Amiri is an award-winning German-Iranian journalist. She joined us from Munich, Germany today.
ای شرقی غمگین وقتی آفتاب تو رو دید
تو شهر بارونی بوی عطر تو پیچی
شب راهشو گم کرد توی سوی تو گم شد
آفتاب آزادی از تو چشم تو خندید
ای شرقی غمگین تو مثل کوه نوری نزار خورشیدمون بمیره تو مثل روز پاکی مثل دریا مغروری نزار خاموشی جون بگیری
Little taste of Sharqi Ghamgin by Feridun Farrokhzad. I see what you did there, Shaya. I see what you did there, because that's Hossein Mansouri, who's in Munich, right?
Yes.
In Munich,
True, yeah.
which is in concert with Natalie, who we were just speaking to. And who's the female voice we're hearing there?
She's Shadi Yusefian from the band Indo.
Oh, that's Shadi Yusefian.
Yusefian.
Okay, and so she's in San Francisco.
Yes.
Where Ahmad
Kiarostami. Exactly.
Munich to San Francisco,
Yes,
exactly where the
yes.
show is going. Nice choice. Well done, Shaya. By the way, if you have any thoughts or comments on that interview with Natalie Amiri that we just did in Munich, info@roqemedia.com, info@roqemedia.com, or depending on what platform you're listening to us right now, on YouTube or on Instagram or on SoundCloud, you can leave us a comment there, post a comment on our Facebook or on our Twitter feed. At Roqe Media is the universal thing to remember. And on any of those platforms, you can subscribe for free, and we really like it when you do. So depending on where you catch us, you can subscribe there. Well, it can never be easy being the progeny of a well-known or successful person. You're following the footsteps of someone who's done impressive things, and you will feel the pressure that inevitably comes with that celebrated last name or legacy of fine work. But surely the heat is turned up a bit if your dad is arguably the most famous filmmaker ever from Iran, and an icon who pretty much defines a genre. Indeed, being the son of Abbas Kiarostami can come with expectations and challenges, but Ahmad Kiarostami has done a fine job of carving out his own path. Ahmad actually studied math and computer science at Sharif University in Iran, and before moving to the United States in 2001, he took a leadership role at Microsoft Middle East and founded 3 companies, including Negah, the first multimedia and online production venue in Iran. In 2007, Ahmad was chosen as a young leader at the Asia Society's 21 Young Leaders Summit. He has served on the boards of the San Francisco Cinematheque and the Roqe, the oldest operating cinema in North America, and in 2014, Ahmad started DocuNight, an initiative to screen Iranian documentaries on a monthly event basis, often in over 20 cities in North America. In 2016, Ahmad became a fellow at the Aspen Institute, an international nonprofit think tank based in Washington, D.C. He co-produced Coup 53, a feature documentary, as well as Feathers of Fire, a visually breathtaking cinematic shadow play inspired by the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, a production we have discussed at length on this program. And he's also created some of the most viewed Iranian music videos on YouTube. Most recently, Ahmad Kiarostami is the co-founder and CEO of Quantum, a platform to teach science to elementary school students in the United States. And Ahmad Kiarostami joins me from San Francisco today. Hello, sir.
Hello, Jian. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm very happy to get to talk to you and have you on the program. I should say we're hearing a lot about another rise in COVID cases in California. I'm sure it's been a tough time for you with respect to your cinema series and events, but I hope you've been okay through all of that.
Yes, my main job is computer, so I've been enjoying, if I wasn't for all the difficulties that people are going through, I've been enjoying sitting at home by my computer and working. And actually, because we had to stop the screenings, we launched an online version, a streaming version of DocuNight, which is now available online. People can go and watch Iranian documentaries. It's kind of like a mini Netflix.
I'm going to get to that.
You can watch at home and watch the films.
I love it, Persian Netflix. Let me first, though, I mean, there's so much to get to with you. I feel like I would be remiss and indeed I would feel disrespectful if I did not start with your father, Abbas Kiarostami, because later this week will mark the 4th anniversary of his passing. Last week would have been his 80th birthday. And Ahmed, last week on the occasion of that birthday, you donated all of his awards, and there are many, to the Museum of Cinema in Iran. Can you tell us about making that decision?
Yes. So the first part of the decision was made by my father himself. He gave some of his awards to the museum, including the Cannes Award, which is the most important one. But he had a relatively small section in the museum. And after his passing, we're thinking what we should do with his work and stuff. And these awards, they've been sitting at his home for almost 4 years now, collecting dust. And I thought it would be a good thing to give it to the museum to sit next to the other ones for people to see. So we gave about 50 or 60 different awards that was at home. We gave it to the museum, and they were very kind. They expanded the section and included all those awards in the section that they have for my father.
You know, when I heard about this, you doing this, I immediately thought of, your dad was famously, of course, awarded the Akira Kurosawa Prize for Lifetime Achievement in Directing in 2000, and he generously gave the award away on stage to Behrouz Vosseighi, whom he wanted to honor. What was your dad's relationship towards being celebrated or winning awards? Was he uncomfortable with that kind of recognition?
That's a good question. I would say he went through phases. So at the beginning, it was very exciting. But then at some point, he said that the attention to his name has become bigger than the attention to his films, which he thought was wrong. And I think that he never said this publicly, and this is my own thought, but I think he didn't want to think about winning or not winning awards either. So at some point, he announced that he would not participate in any competition in any festival anymore, which took about, I don't know how long exactly, about 7, 8, 10 years. And then he changed his mind again and participated in competition. And when they asked him about that, he said, only fools don't change their mind. So he had that back and forth. But in general, he didn't care that much about prizes. I remember that once he was a part of the jury at Cannes Film Festival. And they treat you like kings there if you're a jury there. And he was shooting a film. He had to stop the shooting, go to Cannes for 10 days, and then go back to the shooting. And the shooting was in a remote village in a very difficult situation. He didn't even have a bed there. And he said, going from this to that and coming back to this, that's the only way that I can keep the balance, because life is neither that nor this.
Right.
There's something in between.
It's so interesting because it is kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, if I, having never had the occasion, unfortunately, to meet your late father, if I would assume that he wouldn't. I mean, he certainly wouldn't be the kind of guy, based on watching his films or the ones he produced or wrote the screenplays for. He did not make art for the sake of winning awards or even making money. But on the other hand, as you know, and he would know throughout his career, winning these awards can be the difference between getting distribution or getting world recognition for a film and not. So it is, I guess, a double-edged sword, huh?
Of course. And he did the same thing forever. He had the same approach to cinema. And for the first, 10, 15, 20 years, many people criticized his way of doing cinema. They said this is not even cinema. And he kept doing the same thing that he believed in. So that's another reason to show that he really didn't care about the things that others said, but only did what he believed in. And at some point, people accepted him.
What did they mean by that? This isn't cinema. What were they referring to?
It's a longer story, but the funny part is there's a funny story about the very first film that he did, The Bread and Alley. This was the first film that he was doing. He had made several TV commercials before then, but this was the first film. And there's a shot in the film that there's a boy and a little dog, and the boy goes inside his home and shuts the door, and the dog's supposed to sit there behind the door. Mm-hmm. And they shot the whole film, I don't know the exact numbers, but in a week. And it took them a couple of weeks or more to shoot that one scene. And the reason was my father didn't want to cut. He wanted to have everything in one shot, that the kid goes in, closes the door, and the dog sits down. And of course, the dog was not a professional actor, so he wouldn't listen. He had an argument with the DP, with the director of photography, and he told him that you don't know cinema. In cinema, we have something called editing. You can cut. You can cut that scene to this one, which is eventually what they did at the end. And many years later, he said, I didn't know cinema. And it took me years to realize that he was right. And it took me many more years to realize that I was right, because I didn't have to follow any rules. I was doing things my own way, and I didn't have to follow that rule. And if I wanted to do it that way, if the feeling was right to me, I had to do it my way. So many things that he did, even when he did Taste of Cherry, all these very long car shots with nothing happening.
Yes.
Sometimes just a dialogue, things like that. People said this is not real cinema. Some people criticized him. But again, he did things his own way, and at some point people accepted it and started appreciating it.
Only a fool doesn't change his mind.
True.
Let's come back to your dad specifically. I mean, it is hard to tell your story without referencing him, as he is such an iconic figure in the world and in your life. But take me back to your earliest memories growing up in Iran. You talked about your dad saying the attention to his name had become bigger than the films. When did you realize that you had been born into a family with a famous last name?
So when I was born, his last name was not famous. Actually, I am exactly the same age as his first film. He made his first film in 1970. I was born in 1971. But I was 3 years old. He got a prize at a festival, and he was on TV. And they called him Abbas Kiarostami, and I heard it, and for some reason I liked it. And after that, I started calling him Abbas Kiarostami Jun, because that's the name that I heard on TV.
Right.
So I think, if I want to answer your question, goes back to then. But then I didn't really realize that until maybe I was in high school.
And then when you were in high school, are people pointing at you and whispering, and that's the kid
asking.
of...
So the question that I got receiving was, are you related to that Kiarostami? Right. And at the beginning, it was interesting. But then it became very difficult, to be honest with you, especially in that age, because you want to you want to prove yourself. You want to see, I
Right.
am a man of my own. I can do things. I'm not son of somebody. I'm me. And it became very, very difficult. And I was 18 when I seriously considered changing my last name. I even got the forms and everything, but then I thought this would send a message that is not my intention.
Right.
And the very last moment, I decided I'm not going to do it. But I had that problem until I was 20, I don't know, 6, 7, maybe. It was difficult. And then something very stupid and random happened, and the whole thing went away from me. One night, my father called me at 2, 3 a.m. And I thought something bad had happened. And I said, what's going on? And I said, I just came back from a party, and I had to call you and tell you something. And I said, what? He said, I was at a party. Let me go back a little bit. During the high school, I worked in cinema. I worked with different directors, including Bahram Beyzai, Nasser Taqvai, all those guys. But then when I finished my high school, I thought I didn't want to stay in cinema because I didn't want to stay under my father's shadow. So I completely changed my path. I studied math and computer science and went to the engineering direction. So that night, my father called me and said, I went to this party. And
sorry, you're still in
you're
still in Iran at this point, huh?
Yes, I'm in Iran. I left Iran when I was 30.
Okay, yeah.
So I was maybe 26 or 27. And he called me and said, so I went to this party, and there was a guy there. They introduced me and said, Mr. Kiarostami. And he looked at me and said, are you related to that Kiarostami guy in computers? So the guy didn't know my father, but had heard my name. And I think he was somebody who lived in America and had no idea about the cinema or any of that.
Right.
But he didn't know my father. So we laughed at this at 2, 3 a.m. And I hung up. And probably a month later, I realized that it was not a problem anymore. Because I think that stupid, very, very stupid event in my subconscious proved to me that, okay, I did something on my own.
That's an amazing story. You wouldn't have been the first kid of a very, very, very famous parents to want to change their name. Did you have an idea of what name you would change it to? I mean, Scorsese, Coppola?
No, I didn't. But I can tell you that when I released my first music video, Ishq Surat, my father was a filmmaker. My brother was a documentary filmmaker, and there were other families in cinema that the whole family were doing cinema, and I just didn't want to be part of that, the family thing. And I thought I'm going to release this under a different name. So I had to pick a name for myself. And I thought the son of Rostam was Sohrab.
Yes.
So, and instead of Kiarostami, I picked Kia as my first name, and I put my last name as Sohrabi. Sohrab was the son of Rostam. So I released it under Kia Sohrabi, but then I had edited that video on my brother's computer, and they confiscated his computers from his office a couple of months later, and they thought that he had made the video, and I announced that I did it, and after that I released my video.
The cover was blown. Yeah. Wow. Well, and here you are a couple of decades later being still asked about your last name and your father. So it's not something that you can escape, but let
me tell you, for the last 4 years, I've been traveling around the world, just standing there as a placeholder for my father.
Yes.
And I've been I was stupid enough to think I can escape his shadow. I don't even try anymore.
And why would you? Why would you want to? I mean, at this point, once you've carved out your own legacy, you can take such pride in it. The thing is that it's interesting, your story, because when you talk about realizing that you don't want to escape from under the Zita Saye, your father, from under the shadow of your father and the great name and all of that, one would think that at that point you would decide to stay in Iran. I mean, you had become, as you say, this renowned director in your own right, and significantly, you'd become this successful founder of numerous startups. In fact, you were one of the pioneers of successful startups in Iran. Your company was the first startup to be sold in Iran. So it seems like you'd be primed for a very prominent and prosperous life in your home country. What made you decide to immigrate to the United States?
That's a very good question, and I don't have a straightforward answer to it. There were many things that happened, and I had no plan to stay here, to move to America. I came here to visit. There was not a single thing that happened. But first of all, being my father's son, I didn't have any problem with it anymore, but I was not interested in using it in any way either. So that didn't make any difference. And then from what I was doing, like you said, because there were not many people doing startups and companies back then. This is in 1996, 7. In Iran, there were very few startups. We became relatively successful. And at some point I thought I have reached, I don't want to say the top, but at the point that there's not a lot of room to learn and grow anymore. That was one part of it. The other one was a very strange experience that I had in the last months. There was a bidding for a system for a company that belonged to one of the ministries. And we submitted an application, and they called me and they said, you have won this bidding, and we're just going to come there for an in-person interview. The guy came to my office, and basically he said, you have to increase the amount that you have sent us. And then from that much, this part of it goes to that guy, this part goes to that guy, this part goes to me, and you get extra several $1 million. And I was very much offended, and I said, I'm not going to do it. And he literally told me, are you stupid? And I got very upset, and I asked him to leave my company. And we never got the job. And that was a very, very disappointing experience. And then I have a friend, Godfrey Cheshire. He was the chair of New York Film Critic in 1999 in New York. He came to Iran several times, and the last couple of times he stayed with me. And he always told me that, hey, you have to come and visit New York. And I didn't want to do it. There was this ego thing. I didn't want to go apply for a visa and not get it. And then in 2000, at the end of 2000, my father was coming to America for a couple of film festivals. And he emailed me again, and he said, your dad is coming here. Why don't you come and visit the US? And there was in Iran for Nowruz, we have about more than 2 weeks of vacation. And then that year we had Ashura, Tasua, and Arba'in. So the whole country was on vacation for a month and a half. And I wanted to do something with that time. And I thought, maybe I do it. And then next week, he emailed me and he said, you're going to receive a recommendation letter from a senator. And I had no idea about the senators in the US or even the system. I knew nothing about it. But he explained who he was. I didn't even remember. There was a guy back then who had lived in America. I told him that I guess I'm going to America, and said, how are you going to go there? How are you going to get a visa? I said, I'm receiving a recommendation letter from a senator. He said, which senator? I said, I don't remember his name, but the email said he's the chairman of Foreign Relations Committee. I said, you're not talking about Jesse Helms. I said, yeah, his name was Jesse Helms. He said, you're kidding me. That's impossible. I said, why? He said he's the most redneck person in the whole government.
Right wing, yeah.
I said, he's a redneck, but I said, my friend is gay. I said, Jesse Helms giving a recommendation letter to a gay guy to an Iranian, that's absolutely impossible. Next day, I received a fax from Jesse Helms' office, and I still have it. So with that, I got my visa. I came here. The second day I was here, I met a friend of a friend, and we talked and we hit it off, and he said, why don't you stay here and we start a company together? And I said, no, I want to go back to Iran. I was actually in New York. I saw my father there, and I told him about this, and he said, you should consider staying. It would be a very good experience for you. And then a week later, I thought maybe I should. And I called the guy. I asked if he still has his offer. And he said yes. And I stayed. So I'm sorry, that was a very, very long answer to your question. But it only happened by chance. I had no decision to move to America.
The uptake for me is that all the great work you've done bringing Iranian documentaries to Western eyes, or helping to run the Roqe or whatever, we have Jesse Helms to thank for that. Senator Jesse Helms is responsible for the infusion of Iranian culture, which is quite ironic. I had heard, I don't know if this is true, you can correct me if this is absolutely way off base, but I remember I had read somewhere that your dad was actually one of those who was a proponent of Iranian talent staying in Iran. So what did you make of his his ratification, his blessing for you to come to America?
He talked about different things. It wasn't a black and white situation. He specifically said about his generation. He said when we go at an older age, it's very difficult to find roots in the country. And he specifically talked about, he said, when I see my colleagues who left Iran, they went there and they're all struggling, and almost none of them did a good job, created something. But he said for the newer generation, it's different. Their needs are different. Their situation is different. He said, when I was young with normal work, he said, and this is true, that even after a couple of months of working, he bought an almost brand new Peugeot. This is something that young people in Iran cannot even dream of. So he said it. He mentioned that the situation has changed and young people have different needs, and of course they should consider that.
So you come to the United States and you really make your bread and butter creating, incubating, selling tech startups. And the latest project I mentioned to give you props is called Quantum, a platform for teaching science to elementary school kids. I mean, without getting into the weeds of these particular startups, why have startups been such a part of your journey? I mean, other than the fact that they've obviously been lucrative for you, what do you get out of creating these things, or the entrepreneurial side of you, I should put it?
Exactly what you said, creating something. And I think the whole process of creation is a very pleasant, very, very pleasant experience. No matter what you do, if you get to create something, you're lucky. But these days I'm doing less and less. After my father passed away, since he passed away, I've been more involved with nonprofits, taking care of his stuff, finishing his last film, and all those things. So I've been less involved in startup, and sometimes I miss it, to be honest with you.
I want to get to some of the projects you've been involved with, but I want to say that a lot of them, Ahmad, they intersect with the promotion, celebration, or exploration of Iranianism, if I can call it that, in the diaspora. It seems like much of what you do related to art, culture, film, is often made by Iranians or about Iranians. Your work with, say, Feathers of Fire and the Shahnameh Project. And you've made a number of music videos with Iranian artists, one of which was the most viewed video of the day on YouTube on the day it was posted. How important is it for you to want to bring Iranian stories and history to Western audiences, or to other Iranians, I should say, outside of Iran? How much does that drive what you do?
I'm not doing it out of importance, to be honest with you. It's not because I'm a nationalist or anything like that. And I know some people would not like to hear that, but it's not because of that. I think Iran is just like any other country, like Turkey, like China, like Russia, like France, whatever. But the thing is, I know that part of the world better, and I know those people better, and I know that art better. So I have something to say there, and I have more connections. But I equally enjoy the art from anywhere else, to be honest. So what you're saying is not because I want to specifically promote Iranians or Iranianness.
You don't see yourself as some kind of ambassador of Iranian culture.
Yeah, I don't want to call myself that at all. I think it doesn't matter where you're coming from. There are interesting things everywhere in the world. And I happen to know that part of the world. So I'm a better candidate to talk and show that, and I know more people there, so it's easier to get involved with them. But I also did a music video for a French band, which my father thought was my best video, but it's the least viewed music video that I've ever done. I don't feel I have a mission to promote Iran or Iranians or anything like that. It just happens that I know that more.
So what about DocuNight? This is the program that takes place in more than 20 cities in North America at times, which screens documentaries about Iran or from Iranians, or that have been made by Iranians. Why the desire to show Iranian documentaries to the world?
So that came after two completely separate things that happened to me. The first one was the election the famous election of Ahmadinejad in Iran. And I caught myself having a lot of opinion about what was going on there without being there for 8 years back then. And I thought about it long and hard, that what's the best way of educating myself about what's going on in Iran. There are different news media from all sides that they only tell you, at the best case, if they don't take sides, they just tell you the newsworthy part of the news of what's happening. But life is a lot more than that. And we have covered many different aspects of life in Iran in the past 6 years in DocuNight, from media to something completely political, to Rafsanjani's daughter, to Basij, to something completely irrelevant to politics. So we covered all of that. And I think if you look at it as a big picture, that's what's going on in Iran. And I do it to educate myself to begin with. And also I thought people here, they try to either condemn Iran and what's going on there and the government and all that, or they try to show an exotic image of Iran.
Right.
And neither one is true. Both are just parts of Iran. Iran is bigger than that. My first music video that I did was also the same thing, that you always have these girls, with long hair and the wind and all that beautiful girls. I didn't have any of that. It was the life of normal people on the streets in Tehran. And I thought showing a real image of Iran, good and bad. I'm not saying positive and I'm not saying negative. The truth has good parts and has bad parts. I thought showing that is the best way of educating ourselves and others about Iran.
Yeah, speaking of what you've been doing in the last 4 years, you are the founder of the Kiarostami Foundation in San Francisco. What is the mission of the foundation?
3 things. The first thing is to archive and organize the existing work of Abbas Kiarostami. He was very creative and at the same time very unorganized. So things are all over the place. And I'm still working on organizing things. And that part, the most important part was, the first part of his career, the first 20 years, he made films for Kanun Parvarish Fikri. And those films, they didn't leave Iran except for a couple of occasions, but they were also in a very bad physical shape. So I thought the first thing that we should do is saving those films. The second part of the mission of Kiarostami Foundation is to finish his unfinished project. He had 2 films, one short film, Take Me Home, and one full-length film, 24 frames,
yes,
which I did. I finished those things. And he also has 2 large photo collections that he has never shown anywhere. So one of them, half of it, we showed half of it in collaboration with the Louvre Museum. They had an exhibition in Tehran. We showed half of them in collaboration with them. And then the second one, we have not shown anywhere yet. And we were in the process of showing parts of those in different places. But because of this COVID-19, everything stopped. So that was the second part. And the third part was the defining new projects that help promote his way of doing things or art projects. And one is DocuNight. The other one is an art residency program that I started last year in France, in Paris, in south of Paris. This year we had to cancel because of the COVID-19 as well. But it's an art residency, art and cultural residency program that I started under Kiarostami Foundation.
Is it weird, or does it make sense for the Kiarostami Foundation to be in San Francisco? Would you base it in Tehran if you could?
Absolutely, definitely. But there are a couple of things. The first thing is I don't live there, and I'm the only one taking care of these things. I live here, so it has to be here. The second thing is the law in Iran gives permission to the government to basically take ownership of non-profit organizations, and that's what happened to Bunyad Golshiri, the Golshiri Foundation, and another foundation. And after talking to several people there, which were involved in those foundations, they recommended that we should not have this in Iran. So the legally Kiarostami Foundation is not in Iran, but we do things in Iran. Giving the awards to the museum is part of it. I'm talking to a group of people about releasing his films, the restored version of those, as a full collection in Iran. So I am working in Iran as well, but legally the foundation is outside, unfortunately.
Tell me about the board members of the Kiarostami Foundation, because it's certainly a testament to him and you, I suppose, that to have these kind of names involved with the foundation. Tell me a little bit about how they got involved.
Yeah, so all these people that I have on the board, there are people who either knew my father very well, or a couple of them that they didn't know him, they knew his work very, very well, like Iñárritu or Richard Linklater. They know his work very well, and they're big fans of my father. So to all these people, Shirin Neshat, Tom Lodi, they are on the board of Kiarostami Foundation because of their admiration of my father's work. And also Peter Becker, the owner of Criterion, he has been very, very instrumental with many things. Criterion is the distributor of all of Kiarostami films in North America and the UK. So these people, yes, I'm very grateful that they lend their names to me to put on Kiarostami Foundation. It was not because of me, obviously, it was because of my father. And their presence there opens doors and makes it possible to start conversations. And I'm really grateful for that.
It's good to get to talk to you and to hear about all your projects. I know that this is probably not the easiest subject to talk about, but could you talk about your father's passing? Did you get a chance to see him while he was unwell in that final period?
Unfortunately not. The reason was because of different issues. You never know. You never really know if you can go back to Iran or not. Yes. So what the situation is, and I think that creating that paranoia is part of the plan. So maybe I was paranoid, but I checked with a couple of different sources, and I could not go back to Iran. I thought if I go there, and if I go in Iran but can't see my father or can't help, that wouldn't help. But then the last week on a Wednesday, we moved my father from Tehran to Paris, and I had a ticket to go to Paris the next Wednesday. It happened very fast, so I needed a week to wrap things up and go to Paris, and I suppose my plan was to stay with him for as long as it takes. But unfortunately, before that Wednesday, he passed away on Monday, so I didn't get to see him, no.
So where exactly were you when you found out?
I was at home. I got a call from Paris, and I saw the name. I knew what happened. It was early in the morning, and that's what happened.
What was the last conversation you had with him?
So when he was sick during that 4 months of illness, most of the time he was not conscious. But we talked several times, but he was very weak, very, very weak. He couldn't really talk. So it was more like just seeing him and not a real conversation. But the main conversation that I had was the night before he went for surgery. And, he never almost said nothing about my music videos when I made them. But then I know that he was showing them to people when they went to his home. They would take him to the screening. We had a small screening room. He would take people there and show my music videos. But he never said nothing about my music. Very, very small comments. Like I showed him a music video, Homeless, and he watched the whole thing. And he said, that one shot that you had, it shouldn't have been there. And he was right, absolutely. And that was his whole feedback. But then the night before he had a surgery, and it's supposed to be a very simple surgery. He had planned to leave the country 3 days after that. So he's supposed to just go in, come out, and then go to China to shoot his next film. But the night before, he said the doctors told me that I have to rest. So I stopped working at 10 p.m. and that was his, taking it easy, not working late. And he said, I know he wasn't computer savvy. He didn't know how to search for things. But he said, I went to YouTube and I found your music videos. And he started giving me very positive feedback about every single one of them in details. And so I watched them all, and then we talked about that. It was a very strange conversation, to be honest. And the last time I saw him was actually in Toronto. Just a couple of months before then, he was there for a show that he had there. And I came there to see him at Aga Khan Museum. I came there to see him, and then he went back to Iran a couple of months later. That happened.
And how did it feel when you realized your dad? We all want validation from our parents and the people we respect. How did it feel when you realized he had been through all your videos and was making comments about them?
Yes, it's true that we all need validation, especially between fathers and son. And we had our ups and downs throughout the years, obviously, like many other fathers and sons. But at some point, I stopped seeking validation because I wanted to be on my own. Not because he wasn't giving. He was actually a very supportive, very, very supportive person in most cases. But for my own sake, I stopped looking for that validation. But of course, I was looking for it. But the part that felt unusual was that he went on his own, searched for them, and looked at them. He was always too busy with his own projects to do these things, and he did all of those. And I thought this is a new phase of a relationship.
It's almost like he knew something. He knew that this was the moment to.
Yeah, he was very. It was very unusual, but he was very depressed. He didn't even know what depression was for many years, like for all his life. He literally didn't understand depression. But then there was a girl who was like my father's daughter, the daughter that he never had, and he always wanted to have a daughter. And she spent a lot of time with my father, took care of him in many different ways. She and her husband, they both were very close friends. And he always said that there are two people in my life that if they die, I have no reason to stay. One was his mother. The second was this girl, Hamideh Razavi. And about a year before he died, a little less than a year, my grandmother died. And few months after that, this girl had a car accident and died. And after that, my father was completely depressed. And when I saw him in Toronto, he was very much depressed. And like he would just sit there and start crying. And that, again, you don't get it, that I couldn't even imagine in my life to see that. And he said this after Hamideh left us. I just couldn't recover. And if you watch 24 frames, one of those frames, there are a bunch of seabirds right next to the sea that are flying, and somebody shoots and kills one of them, and all these seagulls, they fly away. They leave the scene. And then after a while, a couple of them, they just sit there. And after a while, others come back and start flying and then playing again. But those 3, 4, they sit and they don't go back flying. And that was the story that he made that for Hamideh. And that's how he felt, that other people went back to their normal lives, but he couldn't do it after that. So he basically lost a child, and he couldn't recover after that. And I think at some point, my cousin, Homa, he took care of my father a lot during that time. And when he could come home, he would stay with her, and sometimes she would go stay with my dad. And he told my cousin at some point that, do you think it's worth fighting? Because he was going through all this. He was literally fighting for his life after 4 unsuccessful surgeries. And he asked her that, do you think it's worth fighting? I don't think it's worth fighting. And I think after that, he just stopped fighting and he left.
You mentioned 24 frames. And the posthumous completion of that film in 2017 that you were involved in. How hard was it to be involved in that after your dad's passing?
probably one of the most difficult projects that I've ever done. And it wasn't just like that. After my father passed away, I became much closer to him because all my life I was doing my things, he was doing his things, and I would go see him once a year. But then I had my own life. After he passed away, I just started going through his stuff, and every day I don't remember spending that much time in my mind with my father ever. Part of it was his poetry, part of it was this 24 frames and all that. So emotionally, it was very difficult. But also about the project itself, the most difficult part was I had to keep reminding myself that this is not my project. This is my father's project. So what I have to do is I have to learn what he was thinking when he was doing this. In a way, what would Jesus do if it was here? So I had to keep reminding myself all the time that what would Abbas do for this scene, for this part, for the sound, for all of those. Fortunately, he had done most of the creative parts. The only artistic thing that we did for the film was designing the sound of it, which is a big part of the film. So I had an opinion about something. I had to remind myself, it's not up to me. I have to realize why Abbas did it. So I tried to find the stories behind those 4-minute long videos. Some of them I couldn't find the story, but some of them I could, like the one that I just told you. So when you know the story, then the way you look at it changes a little bit, and that was emotionally, and even just a project, doing a project. It was not an easy project.
It's good to talk to you, Ahmad. Before I let you go, you just talked about how you feel closer, you felt closer, you had a new appreciation for your relationship with your father and for him after his passing. The anniversary of his death is later this week, and the life and loss of your father meant an enormous amount to many Iranians, both in Iran and those in the diaspora. It may be that many felt that this legend was robbed from us, all the more stinging given our distance and disconnect with contemporary Iran. How does that legacy, that devotion of people of Iranian descent to him translate for you and your life being the son of an icon like Abbas Kiarostami?
I'm very grateful, and it's a lot of responsibility, both of them. Just taking care of what he has done is a big responsibility, and it is challenging doing it from here, from afar, and with everything that's going on there in Iran. It is challenging, but I'm grateful for the attention that people are giving to him and his work. And I think, so for me, it was on a different level, it was a different way. But I think many people there, based on what I see on Instagram and internet and all, people are rediscovering him, many parts of him. And I'm hoping to be able to make his work more available in Iran, including his films, as I mentioned, and his poetry and his other things. So I have some ideas about doing these things, and I hope to get to do those things every year.
Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you, Jian. I appreciate it.
Khudafiz.
Khudafiz.
Ahmad Kiarostami, a producer, filmmaker, entrepreneur, founder of the Kiarostami Foundation. He spoke to us from San Francisco today. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of Roqe. Thank you to the amazing Roqe team. Thank you to those of you out there supporting us, subscribing, and telling people about this new podcast and new show. I want to go out on one of the songs that Ahmad did a video for amongst the famous Iranian artists he's done videos for. This is actually from 2010, and it's actually Gugush revisiting a well-known song of hers, "Man Gunjishkai Khune," me and the birds of my house would be the translation. This is with guitar and arrangement by our dear friend Babak Amini. Thanks again for listening. Mizun Bashin.
به